The man who screamed at my bedroom window every night. Okay, so a little bit of backstory. I'm a 19-year-old male, was about 10 when this took place. I spent a large part of my childhood living in a town called Renfrew, Ontario, Canada, with my mom and her fiance at the time. It was a pretty average-sized town, calm, peaceful, and relatively nice place. We lived in a house on a street that I believe was called Stewart Street. Life was pretty normal for the most part. Our driveway and our neighbor's driveway were both connected, so we had to park beside each other, and both houses were pretty close to each other. I never saw much of my neighbor, other than the occasional time that he was in his backyard, probably tending to his garden. He was a middle-aged man, probably 40 or 50 years old, and he's never said hello or acknowledged me or my family when he looked at him or walked past him in the driveway. Everything continued as normal as ever, until one night, when I headed into my room to go to bed. My room had one window, and it faced out towards the driveway. I had blinds, and they were always slightly open so that I could see through the open gaps. On this night, as I lay in bed, I could hear crunching in the gravel on the driveway. I never thought anything of it, and assumed it was probably my mom's fiance outside doing something, but no, I was very wrong. I turned over in bed to face my window, and as my eyes slowly adjusted in the darkness, I could see through the gaps of the blinds that there was a pale face looking through my window, staring directly at me. I made eye contact, and I couldn't look away. I was so horrified that I almost wet the bed. I tried to scream out for my mom, but I was too scared of him hearing me and breaking through the window. He continued to stare, but it was almost as though he was looking off into the distance towards me, like someone who was zoned out. Finally, he slowly raised his head up to the roof, and he started fucking screaming at the top of his lungs. "Shut up, you fucking birds! Shut the fuck up! Shut up, you motherfuckers!" The second he started screaming, I got chills. The creepiest part of it all was that there were no birds. No birds chirping. No noise. Nothing. Other than him. His screaming was so serious and so full of rage that it felt as though that he was legitimately enraged by these imaginary birds. Somehow everyone in the house except me managed to sleep through the screaming, which went on for almost the entire night. I did not sleep a wink, and the man didn't leave my window until about 4 a.m. When the morning came, I was far too scared to tell my mother about what had happened. I just went about as I usually did. The door we entered the house from was in the backyard, which meant when we left, we had to walk through the driveway. Usually my neighbor was never outside, but one day while I was walking to school, he was standing in the driveway about to get in his car. I did my best to look down and avoid him, walking as close to the wall of my house as possible, when I noticed out of my peripherals that he was standing completely still, holding his car door open, watching me walk. My eyes naturally darted towards him, and I could see his eyes watching me, full of something I can only describe as intent. His nighttime screaming continued, always telling the fucking birds to shut up, occurring about every other night. On the nights that he didn't show up, I had chronic nightmares of him opening my window, and my grades started to suffer. I was in a constant state of terror. Eventually I realized that I had no choice but to tell my mom what was going on. I woke up after one of my nightmares and went into her room and told her about our neighbor. She attempted to assure me that I was imagining it, and I was only dreaming. The rest of the story is from what my mom told me years later, when I was much older, because I was too young to hear about it. After I told my mother about what was happening, she and her fiance decided they should pay close attention to our neighbor. One night they were having a few drinks and playing frisbee in the backyard. My mom threw the frisbee and it landed on the grass in our neighbor's yard. Mom walked right on over into the yard and picked up the frisbee. It had landed quite close to the neighbor's window. She bent down to pick it up, and as she stood back, she caught a glimpse in the window, in the kitchen of the house. The entire kitchen counter was covered in porn magazines. Sex toys were strewn about. My mom and her fiance started freaking out, assuming he was a pedophile or something like that, and they marched straight to his door and started banging on it. The door had a window, and they could see the neighbor through it in the hallway, but he looked different somehow. He turned around, shocked by the loud banging, and revealed a face covered in makeup. Bright red lipstick, mascara, women's clothes, etc. The man was a cross-dresser. Normally it wouldn't be such a big deal, but there was clearly something wrong with this man. Every alarm was going off in my head, and my mom felt as though he may have someone in his basement or something like that. He ran away, and then came back and answered the door a few minutes later, face washed and regular clothes on. My mom and her fiance flipped out on him, asking him why he was screaming at my window and what's with all the porn, etc. I was never told what he replied to all of this. My mom called the cops, and they ended up coming and searching his house. Inside they found tons of child porn. I have an idea of what that man wanted with me, but I have no idea what he was on about with the birds. Clearly he had some sort of medical condition. All I can really say is that I am so fucking glad I don't live there anymore. I have a few more stories of that town, because it's full of creeps for some reason, but those are for another day. Sandcastle Kicker. Hi, longtime fan of the subreddit. I've been meaning to post this for a while now. It's definitely a childhood memory of mine that I'll never forget. Now, female, 22 years old. Growing up, my aunt and uncle owned a beach condo. My favorite way to spend the summer was to stay there with my family, specifically my cousin Charlie. We were absolutely inseparable growing up. There was a 1 year difference between us. The beach we stayed at was a very popular tourist beach on the South California coast, so in the summertime it was incredibly busy. I mean, barely any room between you and the family next to you. Now, my family would spend all day on the beach, from about 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. The beach would stay crowded until about 5 p.m., and everyone would go back to their rooms to shower and go out to eat. So from around 5 to 7 every day was my favorite time to be outside. We would actually have room to run wild, build sandcastles, dig huge holes, and not have to worry about people knocking them down or being too close. Around 5:30 p.m. one day, my family decided they wanted to walk to the pier, about 2 miles away, and me and Charlie begged to stay so we can build sandcastles. We were 9 and 10 at the time, and they said we could stay, as long as we didn't get in the water or leave our beach spot. The condo we stayed at was 1 row back, and we were not allowed to cross the street without adults. We agreed to our terms and continued to build a row of sandcastles as they walked away. Around 5 minutes later, an extremely tall man wearing a floppy beach hat, sunglasses, and a dollop of sunscreen on his nose came straight up to us. He started commenting on how pretty our sandcastles were, asking how long it took us to build them that high. It was just us two working on them, which I clearly see that he was getting at with these questions now. We were both extremely introverted kids. We thanked him, kept our answers short, and tried to ignore him as he still stood there asking us questions. All of a sudden, he got really quiet, started looking around at the mostly empty beach, and said he had to go meet his friend. He told us to stay right there so he could bring his friend back to look at how great our sandcastles were, and walked away from us. When he got away at a safe distance, me and Charlie both looked at each other and said, "We've got to get out of here." Side note, hell yeah for us for being smart kids. We immediately started weighing our options. We knew our family wouldn't be back for at least another 30 minutes. We also knew we weren't allowed to cross the street, and quite frankly, we were scared to. About 100 yards away is a tiny ramp overlooking the ocean. I believe it was a handicap access to the beach, as well as a place to sit. We got our big shovels and decided to hollow out under the ramp and pier thing, enough to where we could crawl under and not be seen. It didn't take us long, since the high tide over the years had taken a good 3 feet of sand underneath, and our adrenaline was rushing mad fast. We took our shovels inside and crawled under. The man was still yet to be seen. I assume it took us all of 8 minutes to climb under the pier. Our heads were partially visible above the sand horizon, and we started freaking out, thinking he would be able to spot us if he looked hard enough. There were 2 boogie boards lying about 50 yards away that looked like kids had abandoned on the beach. We grabbed them and propped them up against the ramp, covering our crawl space and the top of our heads from sight. Charlie curled up in a ball and cried, while running scenarios by me that we were going to get taken. I tried to calm him down and say everything was going to be okay. Our parents would be back soon. But I definitely felt like crying myself. The whole thing felt so weird. I felt that since we both had such a bad feeling about the situation, especially at such a young age, this was a man with sinister intentions. Charles and I peeked out from the small slits where the boogie boards curved and eventually saw the man walking back. He didn't have anyone with him, which we definitely thought he would since he said he was bringing back a friend. He saw we were gone, turn around several times, checking to see if we were in the ocean or up by the dunes. Once he realized and thankfully didn't notice us there, we were gone, He got extremely angry, noticeably angry. He started huffing and puffing, stomping around. Then he looked at our sandcastles and kicked all of them down. We built a ton over the course of the day and basically had a long wall of them, and he kicked every single mound down and stormed away. We stayed under the ramp and Pierre thing for about 45 more minutes until our family finally got back. We were way too scared to get out, especially after seeing his irrational reaction. We cried and told our family what had happened, and they did not believe us. We still talk about it sometimes at family gatherings or holidays. Both of us still remember it like it was yesterday. Seriously, I'm so glad we were aware kids who thought quickly. So, creepy ass beach man who kicked down our sandcastles. Let's not meet. He sees you when you're sleeping. As a kid, I lived in a pretty typical suburban neighborhood in a ranch-style house. My bedroom was at the front corner of the house, with a window that faced the street and a window that faced the house next door. I was 11 or 12 years old at the time, and I shared the room with my younger sister. We had bunk beds, and I liked to sleep on the bottom bunk. From the position of my bed, I could see through the window that looked out at the street. I woke up one night to a thud at my front window. I was immediately on edge. I was always a paranoid kid, knowing full well I wouldn't sleep. I lay there petrified. It seemed like hours, but was likely a few minutes later. A man's face appeared through the crack in my curtain. I can see it so clearly in my mind even to this day. I saw the shadow of his hands through my thin curtain cupped around his face, and what I'm assuming was his attempt to see in the window better, and his eyes, nose, and mouth were completely clear through the crack. I cried there for a few minutes, unable to move, while he shifted a few times, trying to see more clearly into my bedroom. I got the courage to slip out of my bed as quickly and as quietly as I could, and ran into my parents' room to wake up my dad. At first, my father tried to attribute the noise to the large lilac bush at the corner of the house, of which the branches would occasionally tap on my window when it was breezy, and the bush was overgrown. I cried and told him about the man. When he woke up all the way and realized what I was saying, he leapt from bed and ran outside. The man was nowhere in sight. My dad told me it must have been a nightmare. It's impossible because the window would be too tall for anyone to look in anyways, and ushered me back to my room. I didn't sleep. The next morning, we realized the planter pot had been put over from the front porch to underneath my front window to be stood on. A piece of the concrete window frame was broken off, and we could clearly see the place where someone's forehead and nose had come into contact with the window. So, man at the window of my childhood bedroom in the middle of the night. Let's not meet. The Stranger in the Orchard. When I was young, from the ages of 2 to 10, I lived on a 7-acre ranch. There's a small house in the front of the property where we lived, a huge grass yard and cabinet shop behind it, and an orchard in the very back full of walnut trees. My father was a carpenter that always worked in the shop, and my mother was a school teacher that was almost always busy, because of their jobs and the fact that they were new to parenting. As I got older, they really didn't pay too much attention, as they should have, or I would wander off. I would spend my days roaming around the yard, playing in the dirt and running through the walnut trees. I obviously didn't question my lack of supervision, as it was fun to explore this huge plot of land, and I just thought I was being a normal kid. When I was about 7 years old, my father surprised me with a brand new, child-sized ATV. It wasn't one of those electric ones that you're probably picturing either. It was a damn fast, gas-powered quad four-wheeler. Now at this point, a good amount of you are probably questioning why someone would get a gas-powered ATV to a 7-year-old child. But like I said, my parents were a bit reckless and my dad, just wanted me to have fun. Pretty much right after I got the thing, I learned how to ride it by myself and started going farther into and past the property than I ever had before. I now had a free ride to basically as far as my young self would let me go before turning back. I started riding through the orchards behind my house almost every day, and I loved it more than I loved anything before. I would leave my house and be gone for hours and hours. After a while, I gradually started roaming farther and farther away from my house as I became more brazen and a little older. I would ride down this dirt path that led past what I assumed was our neighbor's land and to a ditch that held water. At the time, I just liked looking at the water as it flowed, and I felt like I was a little explorer. I honestly never contemplated that what I was doing could be at least a bit dangerous, and I really don't think my parents knew how far I was riding to. When I think back on it now, just the idea of riding a pretty dangerous piece of equipment far away from the house without my parents knowing where I was and before cell phones even existed is pretty scary in itself, as I could have crashed or hit my head and no one would have been able to find me. However, luckily this never happened and is not what this story is about. So, one day, like every other day, I was riding far away from home and I passed by a man wearing a dirty white shirt, denim jeans, and a wicker farmer's hat. I remember it vividly as it was the first person I had seen in all the time I had been out there. I remember the surprised look in his eyes as he stared at me while I rode past him. I had no reason to stop, and my parents had always taught me about stranger danger, so I kept going and forgot about it. On the way back home a couple hours later, I was coming up to the same spot, and it dawned on me that this is where I had seen the men. I looked ahead not expecting him to be there. As I said, it had been hours, yet as the trees parted, there he was. I really didn't think it was too weird, because I figured that he was either a farmer or a homebody, so I kept driving, coming closer to where he was. He seemed friendly, to be honest. He had a big smile on his face, like he was happy to see me. To my 10-year-old self, I just thought he was a friendly guy, so I waved at him as I passed by and he waved back. I continued on my way and drove home, not thinking much about it. I don't really remember how much time passed between then and the next time I went riding, but it couldn't have been more than a couple days. Like usual, I took the same dirt road past the same few orchards to the same ditch full of water. I didn't think much about my previous encounter, so I hadn't been thinking about the stranger with a big smile. I was sitting on the edge of the ditch when I heard footsteps in the dirt coming up from behind me. Again, I remember this vividly, because it was not a common occurrence to see anyone at this trail. I remember being more curious than scared, and turned around to see the same stranger with a smile. This time his smile seemed to be more of a toothy grin. He called out to me as he walked up asking my name, with what was a heavy southern drawl. I told him with confidence that I wasn't really allowed to talk to strangers, to which he said, "That's a good idea. Although you shouldn't really be out here all by yourself. It can be really dangerous for a kid your age." I remember this striking me in the guts with a little bit of a butterfly feeling. I wasn't afraid, but I felt uneasy. This piqued my curiosity, however, as I wondered what he meant, so I asked him. He continued to walk closer to me slowly and answered, "I heard they found a little boy out here, just around your age. I think it was that ditch right there where he drowned." I would like to point out that although my parents were reckless, they were not stupid. If there had been a drowning near our house that was reported, or there had been a story in the papers, they definitely wouldn't let me out anymore. Anyways, he continued, "Why don't you come with me and I'll take you back to your parents? It's not safe out here for a kid your age." It's okay. I have my quad right there. I'll just ride back." I pointed over to the side of him where my quad was, but he didn't look. His eyes remained fixed on me. They were deep brown, almost black, and piercing into me. At this point, I was scared, and I knew that this could be a bad situation. I was hoping that he was just a concerned old man, but there's no way I'm going with him anywhere. I got to my feet to start walking to my quad, to which the man said, "Should a kid your age be riding something that dangerous? Let's just put it in my truck and I'll give you a ride back." I don't see a truck," I said, looking around, hoping to talk my way out of the situation. "Oh, it's right over there on my property. You can't see it from here," he said, his smile widening. "It's really okay, I'll just go now," I said, starting again to walk to my quad. But as I passed him, he reached and grabbed my arm. "You really shouldn't be out here," he said, staring me deep in the eyes. "It's not safe for little kids." "Let me go, you're hurting me," I said. Starting to panic, I shouted, but this only made his grip tighter. "Maybe you don't deserve to go back home. What kind of parents would let their kid out here all alone? Maybe you should come home with me and I'll take care of you. At this point, I was about to pee my pants. I was freaking out, and I started to scream. I don't know if I was saying anything. I just know I was screaming as loud as I'd ever had before. This only seemed to anger him, as his once toothy grin turned into a face of anger. He put his hand over my face, and I took this opportunity to bite his finger as hard as I could. I still remember the taste of blood, so I know I hurt him pretty bad. Thankfully, this caught him off guard, as he finally let go of me. I knew this was my one chance to get away from this weirdo, so I booked it to my quad as he winced in pain. "You little shit, get the fuck over here!" he cried in anger. I knew I didn't have much time, so I jumped on my quad and turned the key as fast as I could. It started up, and just as I pulled the gas handle, I felt a hand start to grab my neck. Luckily, he didn't have a grip yet. As I was already starting to drive away, I punched it and noped the fuck out of there. At this point, all I could hear was the sound of my quad, so I wasn't sure if he was running after me, but I wasn't going to look, as I could possibly crash and be done. I drove down the dirt path as fast as the quad would go, probably the fastest I've ever driven it. When I got home, I peeled out into the dirt and ran into the house, hoping to God my mom was home. I burst into her room bawling, and there she was. She asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't talk yet as I was so afraid. I just kept bawling. I think I cried for a good 30 minutes before I could summon up the strength to stop and tell her what happened. I remember the fear in her eyes as I described what in the world had just happened. She pulled me close to her and hugged me as hard as she ever had. The next day I talked to a police officer and recounted the story of what transpired. I honestly don't remember much after this, as I think I started to block it out. It's not really something a 10-year-old wants to think about. Needless to say, they never let me off the property again. My dad started drinking, and we lost the house soon after this anyways, so I didn't have to live there much longer. Recently, I was thinking about that day after I started trying to remember various parts of my childhood. My parents had never told me what happened after the cops were called, and I never really asked, because I tried not to think about it. So yesterday, I went to her house and asked her if they ever found the guy, considering he had to live pretty close to our property. She was kind of startled by the question, because we hadn't talked about this in 15 years. She paused for a minute, as if pondering whether to tell me or not, and said, "We didn't have any neighbors out that way. It was all corporate-owned land, and the description you gave didn't match any of the neighbors in the other direction. We called the cops, and they went to search where you told us you were, but the guy was long gone by the time they got there. They looked around the property and found an abandoned house that hadn't been used in years since the land was purchased. When they looked inside, they could tell he had been staying there. Apparently, he left his stuff behind. We never told you this because you were way too young, but one of the things they found was a black grocery bag. It had a roll of duct tape and a hunting knife inside." Thanks, Mom. But did I really need to know that?